like to thank the committee for inviting me to speak as a keynote. I've been attending ASL conferences for about 15 years. I really used to look forward to them, especially since most of them were in the Radisson and Golden Lane, which is like 400 metres from where I used to work, so it was very easy to get to. And there's been fantastic keynote speakers in the past. I won't mention, today's have been brilliant, but all the speakers before me, except DBS, boo! But I think of Alison Macrina and Jan Parry in 2016, Scotty Bonner 2017, and the Danish guy we had in 2019, whose name I can't remember, Christian Larson. Yeah. So I think of all them, and I think how inadequate I am. But then I thought that before I got the invitation, so that's okay. I've spoken, I'm quite enthusiastic about open. I've spoken in the past about open source software. I've spoken about open educational resources. 2019, Jane Bugle and I designed the first iteration of the open librarianship model at DBS, and one of the things I wanted to put in it was basically that open is becoming ingrained in librarianship, and it's brilliant, but it might get to the stage where we just do it because we've always done it that way, just like the monkey experiment up there, which never actually happened. You can go online, you can Google 5 monkeys experiment, and you'll get all this bullshit basically about how researchers did this, but it never actually happened. It's a conflation of a couple of things, and it's kind of indicative of the way that the internet's going, I think, which I'll mention later. The phrase I started writing a speech, but to do this presentation, but I figure I better just ad-libbing, so I'd written TED Talk style bullshit for this, which I think is very accurate. So anyway, when you do a presentation, when you do a keynote, I think there's sort of pressure on you to tell a story or have a narrative. So this is my thesis, which can be summarised by you know the Godspeed Black Emperor, you Black Emperor song, Blaise Bailey Finnegan III. Things are going to get worse and keep on getting worse. Well, I'm sorry, that's the way I feel. So to sum that up in 3 words, everything is shit. But the thing is, my talk synchronises nicely with the case reports which are coming after, because they all provide wonderful demonstrations of how things aren't shit and how librarians can improve things. So another thing mentioned about that is information wants to be free. It's a nicely ambiguous phrase. What does free mean here? And I'll come back to that, I think. I have to move this, so I keep moving. So in a parallel universe, Cory Doctorow, who's a Canadian writer and technology commentator, would be giving this keynote speech, I think back in the day, a couple of years ago, when I was still, I can't remember if I was still on the committee, but his name was mooted, and as a speaker, and I think he'd be far more interesting than I am, but I'll think of me as a bargain basement Cory Doctorow. But he came up with a great word in shitification, which talks about the way that the internet is sort of degenerating and how things are getting worse. I mean, a case in point might be the takeover of Twitter. Once that guy took it over, it's really gone downhill. I think you'll agree. I hope you agree. Maybe you won't. Okay, that's fine. Everyone's entitled to their own opinions. But the way that things generally get worse, Google search, I think, has gotten worse. Again, I'll come back to that later. I see nodding heads. Brilliant. I like you. So this is where we're at. So what is open anyway? It's a number of things. It's brilliant because it fits in with the theme of the conference. It's all about fair and equitable access to knowledge. It's about transparency. In science at the moment, particularly the soft sciences, psychology and social sciences, there's a bit of a problem with replication of experimental results, and part of that is because data isn't open. So you've got to be transparent. about what you're doing. Open's about collaboration, it's about sharing, and also I think an unrepresented or sort of an aspect of open that isn't given the importance it deserves is accessibility. I think I'm the first person to say if it's not accessible, then it's not truly open, and I'm going to copyright that phrase because I think other people might have said it, but I said it first, okay? And it's all about being able to disseminate your knowledge freely and widely. So it's different aspects, and I think for the most part, we get caught up in open access publishing, but there's other aspects of open data, which I mentioned there about transparency and replication, educational resources, which I'm very, very enthusiastic about. I'm not passionate about it. I hate the way that passionate has been co-opted into a sort of working environment phrase. I'm passionate about Scottish rugby, more fool me, Celtic Football Club and my family. I'm enthusiastic about the work that I do, and I'm enthusiastic about aspects of open source software, really keen on as well. And it's all about promulgating this, promoting this, so it's all about policies as well. I mean, it's a business model, it's a sensible business model in an era of shrinking library budgets. It's a philosophy, a way of doing things. It's not just about publishing. Also, it's something we should be advocating for and rallying over, and it should be in the future a policy requirement. I think I was trying to, obviously when you do this, you do a lot of research beforehand, and I was at a talk sometime pre-COVID, and it was about, I can't remember what it was about, but it was a chap from a university in Netherlands or Belgium, and he was talking about they'd introduced a new regulation that if you wanted tenure there, then a certain percentage of your publications had to be available open access, and that's the kind of thing that we should be looking at, I think, in our institutions. So, policy requirements. So, again, you try for a kind of, you go for a narrative and you go for a hook. And I was thinking the four horsemen of the library apocalypse, and then I was thinking of Karl Popper and the open society and its enemies. Well, kind of, here we have four enemies of open, I think, in order. They're capitalism, hyper-capitalism. I kind of lean to the left politically, so I'm biased a wee bit. And I find the older I get, the more left-wing that I get, which is odd, I think, and not necessarily the case for most people. Modern-day academic publishing, John Deere tractors, I mean, copyright and digital rights management and artificial intelligence. And I think in different ways, but they all merge and blend together, that they're all kind of inimical to the open movement. So we'll start with capitalism, and I'm not a big fan of capitalism. I'd be a socialist myself, but I recognise there's a difference between sort of small business owners and mega corporations. My best friend as a kid, Richard Thompson, his dad owned a bakery, and he worked ridiculous hours, baking pastries and cakes and everything. He wasn't kind of plotting to take over the housing supply by buying up entire housing estates. So there's differences in the way people operate. So libraries, and I appreciate, I hate this microphone because I've got to lean over it. I can't move because if I move then, oh.
We move it back, you're popping a bit.
Okay. Better?
Yeah.
I can't hear myself now, but everyone else can hear me, so that's great. So an appreciation of libraries, they're kind of a third space in the sense that you're not expected to buy anything in there. They're placed between home and work. They're not commercial, so you can chill out, you can do lots of things there. I had to give a presentation to county councillors a couple of weeks ago, don't ask, and one of them at the end asked me a question along the lines of, why should people use the new library in my rural constituency in county, redacted? And that was nothing to do with my talk or anything, but I was able to tell them, well, story time for kids, book clubs, community get-togethers, and I reeled off a list of things. They said thanks and then shut up after that. But they're not just about lending books. They're spaces where you can relax and you can participate in your community. And at the same time, I think the tweet on the right is very accurate. You couldn't, there's no way in today's society. I think the way that we're taught to think that you could come up with the idea of libraries condemned as communist, never mind socialist. But I mean, if you look in social media, you occasionally see folk asking, why isn't there a Netflix for books? You know, there's bloody libraries there. Why do you need to commodify everything? There's people who think like this. This guy he's an economist and writer, and he does believe this seriously, despite what he says there. He would love to close libraries and give everyone a Kindle Unlimited subscription because he's entirely transactional. There's a blog I look at occasionally called Crooked Timber, which I recommend. It's economics, politics, sociology, and it's very good. The discourse, as it were, is excellent. It's very cerebral. It's very, but still, it's accessible. And he used to comment on it, and from his comments, I know that he's entirely sincere about his belief about closing the libraries. So there are people out there who don't like libraries. Everything, as I say, is purely transactional. Instead of lending books, you should be buying books, or maybe we should be consuming other forms of culture instead. I don't know. So, also when you do presentations, you have a narrative and then you use clumsy metaphors. So my clumsy metaphor comes from a series of short stories written in the 1970s, and really allegories about the oil crisis back then. But basically, this guy writes stories about a world in which magic is a non-renewable resource. He's a clever chap, and he figures out how to drain the mana, the magic, from the surrounding environment. So my clumsy metaphor today is that big corporations act as the warlock wheels, and they suck money out of the environment. If you think about, we live in a low-tax economy, my opinion, and we struggle with infrastructural projects because the money and the will isn't there. If you had the will, you'd find the money. So all these corporations drain finance, they drain other things, but we'll move on to a slide in a minute or two whereby we find that big corporations will acquire and assimilate smaller companies, and you get near monopolies in some sectors and industries, including libraries. So the guy whose book is mentioned there, Robert Bork, is a very interesting character. Those of you who are old enough to remember the Richard Nixon presidency, he was involved in something called the Saturday Night Massacre, in which he killed a whole bunch of people on behalf of Richard Nixon. Some of that might not be true, but if you can Google Saturday Night Massacre, he was involved in that. He's also famous for being nominated to the US Supreme Court and being knocked back by the Senate. But in the 70s, he wrote a book called The Antitrust Paradox. And antitrust is it's economic laws which regulate sort of competition and market share and everything like that. And they were very big in America in enforcing antitrust after some shenanigans in the sort of 1890s, 1900s, Standard Oil, and you had cartels, the Gilded Age, that kind of thing. People like Teddy Roosevelt as president helped enact these laws which were regulated. So they stopped companies from getting too big, and along in the 70s comes Robert Bork and decides that monopolies are okay so long as they reduce consumer prices. So this book has become very influential in American government circles, and so today you end up with big companies and huge companies who are practically monopolies in their fields. Am I still crackling again? Because I find myself moving towards my audience I love so much. So, like Google is near monopoly in digital marketing. Facebook is a walled garden where it can do what it likes. Amazon kind of a near monopoly on online buying and selling. So. And this is bad for competition. You don't like Amazon, where else do you go? You don't like Google, it's difficult to sort of de-Googlefy. You can't live without Amazon because of its web services. I mentioned LibGuides later. LibGuides is hosted on the Amazon Web Cloud in Dublin, so you simply can't extricate yourself from big tech. And in the library world, it's the same. We have lots of big companies, Overdrive, near monopoly on the e-book market in public libraries, and they're owned by venture capital. OCLC are a non-profit, but they're known for buying up other companies that provide library services. Elsevier, cartoon villains, we'll maybe mention them later. EBSCO, actually EBSCO are great guys. Big hand for EBSCO. Where I work, it's a purely digital library, which we've built from scratch, my number 2 and I, and we're very reliant on the generosity of ProQuest and EBSCO to us. And I'm not just saying that because 2 EBSCO guys are there taking notes on what I'm saying, and Clarivate as well. Clarivate are interesting because they are huge, and they're separately owned by a venture capital firm as well. So they encompass ProQuest, Web of Science, Innovative, Ex Libris. By the way, do you know that Ex Libris are Israeli? Bet some of you didn't know that. And it might change the way that you think about library systems. I know that the TU folk are thinking of switching from Koha. I don't know why you'd want to do that. Koha's great, and if you're from a TU and you don't like Koha, then you're dead to me. Thank you. But these are big companies, and they have near monopolies in libraries. But there are alternatives. You can use, say, Koha instead of Ex Libris or Innovative. I mean, I can't really endorse the use of Sci-Hub or the new kid on the block, STC Nexus, which is more interesting than Sci-Hub. I think Sci-Hub stopped uploading material from 2020 onwards because it was part of a court case in India, but STC Nexus provides access to material in a sort of non-legit way. Why use EndNote when you can use Zotero? Zotero's brilliant and it's free. EndNote you pay a subscription for. EndNote Click used to be something called Copernio, and if you have got that installed, if you're doing a Google search or Google Scholar or just a general web search, EndNote Click will inform you if the item is available legitimately open access, but you can use on Paywall, which is a fantastic browser extension, or open access button instead. And same for Elsevier. You can use alternatives. Digital Commons is fantastic, I think, but I wouldn't touch it for a million years because it's far too expensive, whereas there's smaller companies who will host and support DSpace installations for you. Again, PlumX is very expensive, maybe Figshare, Altmetric, Impact Story. There are sort of alternatives to products from big companies. And it makes good sense, I think, if you're more sort of anti-establishment, a bit more radical, you do want to, I think, stick it to the man maybe by using free or smaller alternatives. And it's good to keep a varied library ecology because you're not just relying on one supplier. You start using open source products, maybe it forces commercial vendors to be more honest and up their game. So it's win-win. And if you're using open source products, it can ease your library budgets. I mean, everyone wants more money in the library. Am I right? Am I right? When you have a limited amount of money, you use open source software, open source products, you can get more bang for your buck, right? So we'll move on to academic publishing, and academic publishing is hilarious. It really is. It's not fit for purpose. It's really a shambles, but it's the only show in town. But I bet that you didn't know this. You might know lots of things in what I speak, but this might be new to you. Academic publishing as it stands comes from this guy, Robert Maxwell. If you're young, you might not know him, but you might know his daughter, Jeffrey Epstein. But Robert Maxwell is a very interesting character. He was a media magnate, kind of a bargain basement equivalent of Rupert Murdoch. And he made his money actually by kickstarting commercial and academic publishing after the war. Before the war, scientific scholarly publishing was a bit of a backwater, and after the war, after just sort of rebuilding society, the British government wanted to kickstart scientific publishing, and they employed a company called Butterworth, publishing company called Butterworth, and they twinned that with Springer, the German company, and they wanted to see if they could improve matters and sort of get things going on a more orderly basis. So Butterworth employed Robert Maxwell and as a sort of consultant. Butterworth, a few years after that, lost interest in the whole thing, and Robert Maxwell bought out Butterworth's. He changed the name to Pergamon Press and realised that academics were an untapped source of free labour, and he started creating journals. He would go to conferences, barge in and say, all you scientists presenting today, I will publish your work. And he was very charming and very domineering. A typical quote about Robert Murdoch is, he was a bully, but I loved him. So in turn, he could be charming and debonair and very attentive to you. And if he didn't get his way, he'd start hectoring you and intimidate you, or vice versa. So Pergamon started publishing journals, and it's about the time, about in the mid-1960s, they had 100-odd journals on the go. At the same time, Elsevier had 10 English language journals. You think how many journals that Elsevier have today? It's incredible, because they took on his business model. Yeah, it's just, he made his fortune basically from academic publishing. He was able to buy newspapers, TV stations. He was able to buy English football clubs. He wanted to finance purchase of the New York Daily News, American tabloids. So he sold Pergamon to Elsevier for the equivalent in today's money of something like $1 billion or €1 billion. So he made a lot of money. It was very lucrative. If you're familiar with any journals entitled International Journal of, chances are Robert Maxwell started the journal, and same with a series of journals called Computers. And I realise I'm just staring in front of me and I'm ignoring. Hi everyone, I'm not ignoring you over there. It's just easier for me to stand like this. Computers and blah, he started them as well. So we talk about people who shape society. My opinion is that we live in a society shaped by Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, the deregulation of economic things in the 1970s and 80s, but we also, to an extent, live in a world shaped by Robert Bork and Robert Maxwell, and I think that's incredible and mind-blowing, but that's my opinion. So academic publishing is incredibly lucrative. Here's a tweet talking about the profit margins of Elsevier during the plague year of 2020, when everyone was at home. You imagine Zoom made a lot of money that year. Elsevier made more money, which is incredible. And academic publishing is a fantastically profitable venture. Pound for pound, it has a better profit margin than just about any other industry on the go, including folk like Google and Facebook, big tech. And we all contribute to it because we provide free labour, we write articles, and we peer review for free, because we're kind of stupid that way, I think. So from about the year 2000 onwards, there's been a sort of move to open access publishing to make scientific academic knowledge more freely available. So instead of having material behind a paywall. So there's different varieties of open access: green, gold, bronze, which is bizarre, where companies just randomly decide to, publishing companies randomly decide to make articles free, but they don't do anything about the licensing, so that you can't reuse them or anything. Diamond OA, which I think Jane and Marie will be talking about later, which is nice, but everyone goes for green OA, gold OA these days. And gold OA involves article processing charges and article publishing charges. So can you give me an honest reason why publishing in accounting organisation society is 4 times more expensive than AAC clinical case reports? What's the justification for that? Article processing charges are a licence to print money, and we are the fools being taken advantage of as academics. The other thing which occurred to me, I did a dry run of this on Tuesday just to convince people, to convince myself that I wasn't talking rubbish. And while I was doing that, I realised something about the AAC is American Association of Clinical Endocrinology. So they're kind of a learned society, and one of their goals is to promote good health through better clinical endocrinology. But if they're a learned society, and if you're a learned society and you're publishing articles in a paywalled journal, or the journal that you publish is paywalled, then you're going against your mission and values, because you're not promoting good health or anything, or good values, because no one can see your articles if they don't have a subscription. And if you're in a small institution or you're in the developing world, it's virtually impossible for you to access this material. I had lots of slides which are rejected, but there was one which mentioned that it was a New York Times article from about 2016, and it was from about some researchers in Africa who were pissed off because they didn't realise that someone had published an article about Ebola virus in an paywalled Elsevier journal, and it was warning that a second outbreak of Ebola was imminent in West Africa. But no one, and no relevant researchers in West Africa could access this article because it's the equivalent of a week's wages or anything. So they were severely pissed about that, as you would be. So paywalls can cost lives, and I think if you're a society, you should think about making your journals open access. But yeah, there's been a big rise in gold open access encouraged by publishers. So here's a study which shows, or estimates, in 2015 to 2018, $1.06 billion of public money, more or less, was transferred to commercial publishers. So my clumsy metaphor, the warlock wheel, you have big publishers sucking money, private money, into their own coffers. And because it's the funders who are paying, the publicly funded research bodies who are paying for all this. If you think about it, what could public funders do with an extra $1.06 billion? You could do a hell of a lot more research. You could employ a hell of a lot more people. You're circulating that money in the economy, I think, because you're buying equipment. People are spending that money with their grants or whatever. But instead, it goes to the shareholders of private companies, and I don't think that's fair, personally. So what I want to say is your transformative agreements are not transformative because they maintain the status quo and they transform public money into private money. I'm not sure the OA project has worked. It's well-intentioned, but I think it's been captured by corporate publishers. It maintains the status quo. I think it's disadvantageous for small outfit researchers. It's bad for developing country researchers trying to get their research published. And also, again, warlock wheels, you're more likely to publish in journals which your library or institution has a deal with, which are more likely to be from the big 5 publishers, whoever it is, not going to be smaller publishers or the learned societies. And the other thing is that gold OA encourages shenanigans. There's a whole slew of predatory publishers out there who are akin to vanity publishers. It's basically, it's write and forget. These folk will take your money. They're cheaper than Elsevier or whoever, but at the same time, there's no quality control standards or anything, and it's easy to make fun of them. It's easy to dunk on them. You'll get articles about Star Trek Voyager or what's the deal with birds, and you'll read about dogs being co-opted onto editorial boards. And it's funny, but it doesn't change things. There are a hell of a lot of predatory publishers out there, and so there are whitelists and blacklists. And it's interesting, in the light of Marilyn's talk this morning, the language there, whitelists and blacklists, and whitelists are good and blacklists are bad. Funny that. So the DOAJ has a whitelist, and then there's several organisations which have blacklists. And here's one, predatoryreports.com, and they're quite interesting because they themselves are predatory. I don't know if you can see that because it's quite small, but it's correspondence between folk from Predatory Reports and a publisher. And what it's saying is that we've put your journal on a blacklist, we put your titles on a blacklist, and we'll take them off as a show of good faith, but let's continue this conversation. So the publisher will write back and say, oh, thanks, and then they reply and say, for the low, low price of $50,000, we can ensure that your titles never appear on this blacklist ever again. So there's a whole black economy of scammers and fraudsters who have grown up around gold open access. And Marie and Jane, you're talking about diamond open access later, so I'm going to get a list of your titles and start my own blacklist. But I can give you a good price on making sure your titles don't appear on that blacklist. Okay, we'll talk later. Thanks. It's not just, there's other things I'm not going to mention, like paper mills and buying citations, but there's buying authorships these days. There's sites out there where you can buy authorships, and some of that is, it's a cry for help in the sense that you have researchers in developing countries and they can't afford the APC of publishing in a decent journal, so they advertise for a co-author to pay the money so that they can get published. But there's other sites where you can just buy a co-authorship at random, improve your CV. I quite fancy being co-author of the economic potential of renewable energy sources. That'd be good for my CV, and it only costs $550. Bargain. So I say I don't think academic publishing is working. And do we need academic publishers in the first place? Because a lot of this stuff we do ourselves. What do publishers do? Publish. They do a few things apparently, but if we delve into this, here's a study from, I think it was 2019 or 20, I can't remember, 2019. It's in my reference list. I've got an extensive reference list at the back. So it compares the finished article published in an August scientific journal with the preprint. And if you have €40, you can buy this. And there's also a preprint available. So you can do your own work here. You can compare the preprint with the finished article, and you can see how many differences there are. There's probably a lot, because the publisher might have read it and said, we do lots of stuff. So it's interesting that publishers claim to do a lot, but what do they actually do? And we'll see more of that later. The other thing is that gold OA encourages bad behaviour by legit publishers. Here's some recent tweets from folk who have resigned from John Wiley journals because they're being encouraged to produce more issues. That means more work for them, more work for the peer reviewers, but if there's more gold OA, then it's more money for them. And do we really need more articles just for the sake of it? It seems that publishers don't care about the value of information because they just want to make a profit. Another recent study, there are too many articles. And when there are too many articles, it's difficult to find the information that you want because you wade through lots of guff. But this is the world in which we live. I haven't mentioned Eugene Garfield, Institute for Scientific Information, Web of Science, part of Clarivate now. But he was the first guy, I think, to recognise that citations were a valuable measure of scientific performance. And that's fine, but it's been Goodhart's law here. An example is that you can game any kind of measure. That measures become targets. They cease being good measures. So you look at like the research excellence framework in the UK. They might be switching to open access the next time around, but certainly an expectation that you publish articles, you publish in good quality, high impact journals, and you try to get lots of citations. But again, during my dry run, I said I bet I could find a study that says that because these things have become targets rather than measures, have changed scientific publishing. So what you get And I found one yesterday. So here's a study saying, in particular, the number of publications seems to be a good metric as a result of longer author lists, shorter papers, and surging publication numbers. Citation-based metrics such as citation numbers and H-index are likewise affected by the flood of papers. Lots of self-citations. You reference your buddy's papers and the inference that he or she will reference yours. So the whole thing is rotten, I think. And probably we need to intervene. I think we need to do this ourselves. Librarians, we need to think about publishing, creating our own journals, publishing Diamond OA. But I'm reminded of a quote from Audre Lorde, who's a black feminist intellectual American. And the salient quote here is, "The master's tools were not disassemble the master's house." So I don't know if I think we should do Diamond OA because I think it's the right thing to do, but I think the whole academic publishing endeavour is rotten, but that's to resolve that is above our pay grade. It's not just journals, it's textbooks as well. Textbook market is an absolute scam, and who buys these books? We do, but nobody else does. And again, there's no quality requirement here. What's the difference between the 10th edition of Kotler's Marketing and the 11th edition of Kotler's Marketing? It's a new cover, but apart from that, what's in there? So the whole textbook market is a scam, particularly in the US. 1,041%, or whatever that is, that's 2.5 times the inflation rate of everything else. E-books are not less expensive than their print versions, but you see there that folks struggle to buy the textbooks for the course. There's another statistic there which I can't remember offhand, but it's in America in particular, folk are deterred from doing courses because of the cost of textbooks on that course, so they do something else instead, something where everything's cheaper. E-books are a particular scam, I think, and there's the e-book SOS campaign in the UK. Johanna Anderson, Rachel Bickley and Caroline Ball. I think Johanna Anderson has moved to Ireland. She's one of us now. Way. And this has been adopted by the LAI, who have strenuously denounced the pricing of academic e-books. But that's just, with all the best will in the world, it's kind of misplaced, I think. Here's a book I was asked to buy recently, and if you've been bitten by a radioactive spider, this should set your spider sense tingling. There's a few things you might not like about that. It's an interesting title. It's a publisher you've never heard of, dodgy, amateurish-looking cover. If you look at the number of pages in the book, 22 pages for unlimited access, €51.69. I've done a bad thing. I've copied chapter 2 in its entirety. That is chapter 2. Right? €51 for that. That's not a mistake. Here's chapter 5. So, with the best will in the world, an investigation of the e-book market to make that cheaper. What's the point? This publisher, I was looking on that platform, they have 400 books which suddenly appeared in 2023 and this year. I don't know how they're generating all these. Maybe I do, but it's just that this is one particular platform. It's available on other academic e-book platforms. So we're being flooded with low-quality titles from dodgy publishers. We're hopefully good enough to realise this and not buy them. I didn't buy it. I wrote to the person and said, no, I'm not buying this because it's shite. But if there's any other books out there, we'll get you them instead. And they came back to me with alternatives, which is nice. But we need to promote OERs, I think, as an alternative to textbooks. And it's not just promoting them, but I think we need to agitate for their creation as well. I'll mention later, I think that we should be creating our own OERs and sharing them. I want to talk about copyright as well, and because of my dry run, I've got to thank Jane, Marie and Robert Alphys, my number 2, for listening to me on Tuesday, if I haven't already. And so I was close to the bone, 55 minutes, I'm sending you to sleep and everything, but so I've taken out some of the copyright, but I do want to mention controlled digital lending, which is enshrined in law, EU law. As, well, they've upheld that controlled digital lending is legit, and that's a big thing. The Libraries Futures Coalition, who are an American library activist group, they big into controlled digital lending, and the principle is that you buy a book for your library, you own it, then you can digitise it and make the e-book copy available for loan. You withdraw the print book from circulation and you use the e-book instead. They use DRM to ensure that you can only loan it for a limited amount of time, and you only allow one loan per copy of the book. So that's all well and good. It's it might be more. Obviously, you can do things to make it more accessible. You put it into Adobe. You can have the read out loud software, etc., stuff like that. It's based on fair use and the copyright exhaustion, which is once you buy something, you own it, and you have the rights to do what you like with it. So that's what CDL is. Say, you can look it up. EU judgment says this is a legit use of books that libraries can do. Internet Archive, which you're probably aware of, is a fantastic site. It's one of my favourites. It's like a modern-day Library of Alexandria, and if there's a sort of 7 wonders of the digital world, this would be one of them. It's incredible. I love the Wayback Machine, which you're all aware of. I'm sure you should be using. Yeah, it's great, isn't it? Brilliant. So during COVID, they started a national emergency library of e-books that them and their partner libraries controlled digital lending. It only went on for a little while. It was only going to be a sort of short-term project. But they were sued, despite the fact they were doing good work. They were making books accessible at a time when books weren't accessible because everything was closed. They've been sued by a coalition of publishers that have won. The publishers have won. Those are the punitive damages which can be enforced. This is over 127 copyrighted books, but part of the judgment is the destruction of every book that the Internet Library Archive has digitised. This is going to go on for years and years and years and cost lots of money. So if you're charitably inclined, you could think about donating to the Internet Archive to help them fund this worthwhile fight. Talk about some of this talk has been informed by Glyn Moody, who's a British technology writer. I recommend his book Walled Culture. He talks about the way that companies, big content, restrict and deny access to material that they own. So there's a film, I was going to say it's out at the moment, but it's not out at the moment. That's the thing. Coyote versus Acme, which is a film made by Warner Brothers, and it's an interesting premise. If you remember the Roadrunner cartoons from your childhood, meep meep, meep meep, and how Wile E. Coyote was always trying to catch the Roadrunner using all these gizmos he'd buy from the Acme Corporation. Well, eventually, the premise of the film is that he realised the Acme Corporation were producing rubbish which he can't use properly, so he decides to sue, and he gets a lawyer in to help him. So it's a mixture of live-action animation. It would have been due for release late last year, early this year, but Warner Bros. Have decided to shelve it indefinitely because they can gain $30 million in a tax write-off for it. So currently it's never going to see the light of day, which is a bit unfair. All these people worked on it. It might be good, it might not, but all these people, labour of love or whatever, they produce a work of culture, to use the term loosely, a work of art, and no one is ever going to get to see it, and it could be that it's deleted, wiped, destroyed without anyone ever seeing it. But big companies can do that because they can. Second example there is a personal one. I work in further education. The carpentry apprentices in Ireland use this. There's 2 books, Peter Brett's Carpentry and Joinery, and it's the book, and we can't use any other book. This is the book. There's other books out there. Snap around. So they want to use this, but it's out of print. It's so out of print that the publisher who published it has ceased to exist. They were taken over by Oxford University Press, and all the galley copies, all the proofs of these books have been destroyed or lost, so the book doesn't exist anymore. There's one or two second-hand copies out there. I bought one because I was going to scan it. I couldn't buy the set. I couldn't find the second book to scan. But I tried to do this legitimately. I went to the Copyright Licensing Agency in the UK because it's a UK book. I said, this book's dead, but I want to use this. I want to scan it. I want to make it available to carpentry apprentices. So to do that for the two books would cost me €40,000 a year, every year. And that's just, no. So what I'm trying to do is to get the carpentry apprentice folk to create an open educational resource for use for carpentry apprentices here and elsewhere, and they'd be brilliant, but they're very slow moving, and I think they're not going to do it until every single copy of these books have been destroyed. I mean, that's not fair. The book's out of print, but they still want to charge me €40,000 for using it. I mean, sorry, no. The third example, which I think is, the name sounds funny, Crunchyroll and Funimation are anime platforms. Funimation was a sort of independent American platform which allowed produced and distributed anime and DVDs and Blu-ray, and the neat gimmick was each DVD game came with a code which allowed you to access the film, the series online. So it was like, and so you could throw away your DVD and just have your streaming copy, which you could access forever. Crunchyroll are another anime platform owned by Sony TV, and Sony TV have decided to close Funimation and delete all the digital copies of the films that you bought. So, and if you've thrown away your DVDs, then you're goosed. But they can do that because they have the rights to it. It's theirs to do what they like, and they don't care about users. So the thing is, today, the other thing, the American law which enforces copyright is called DMCA, Digital Millennium Copyright Act. There's a equally egregious European one, European Copyright Directive, which is wending its way through the European Parliament at the moment. But a couple of things you can do with this is you can create automated copyright detection copyright infringement bots, which will scour the web looking for copyright infringement. And also, if you use DRM, then it becomes an offence to tamper with that DRM. And this has caused consternation for the likes of security researchers, because you can't see how secure our pacemakers are or cars are, which, smart cars, smart pacemakers, smart medical equipment. I think the law's being changed to allow this, but until recently it was the case that if you found a fault in a car, say a smart car, that you're driving along 50 miles an hour, 50 kilometres an hour, someone conceivably could hack into your system and disable the brakes so you wouldn't be able to stop. But if you researched this and published an article on this, you could be sued or prosecuted for doing this. But I think the law is being changed. But again, systems being gamed. In America these days, police are very badly behaved a lot of the time. Bet you didn't know the average training time for policemen in America is like 6 months, whereas it'll take you 2 years to become a qualified librarian. You can become a policeman in some states in America in six months. How does that work? So you get all sorts becoming police, and some of them engaged in bad behaviour. On this day of smartphones, you can film police behaving badly, and there's lots of instances of that. So some smart policemen, there are such things. I figured out that if you play Disney music in particular, Let It Go, Frozen or whatever, anything from the Jungle Book, while you're beating the shit out of a demonstrator, the video that's uploaded to YouTube will be deleted because it'll be detected by a copyright infringement bot and be taken down automatically. So there's people who claim copyright on lots of YouTube videos and will get stuff taken down, and for the low price of $10,000 or whatever, they'll withdraw their claim and allow you to put your material back up. So again, this system isn't fair. I come to the John Deere tractors, but now After the early days of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, lots of Ukrainian tractors were captured by the Russians and sent back to the motherland, and John Deere were told about this and pressed a button, a kill switch, which deactivated the tractors. No tractors for you, comrade. But the thing is, that kill switch can affect anyone. You get behind in your payment of a John Deere tractor, biff. You get behind in your payment of a Tesla, biff, kill switch, whole thing's deactivated, which again isn't fair. So in the digital age, purchase is not ownership. You're buying licenses. I had another slide about ProQuest eBook Central and John Wiley withdrawing collection of 1,200 ebooks from that platform in the early days of COVID or thereabouts. They didn't give much warning. There was a big brouhaha about that, so they they kept them up for another year or two, but they're gone now. So you paid for those books. You think you own those books, but you don't, because they're on a platform, and a snap of the fingers, they're gone. And some of those books are out of print. They're difficult to get, but they don't care, because it suits them they can do what they like. They own the copyright, they own the material, so they can do what they like. So I think in these days, I think it's an obligation practically to, if you buy something, to interfere with the DRM. If you buy e-books, I think you have to strip the DRM, I think, make your own copies. Keep your physical media, buy DVDs, buy CDs, don't rely on streaming platforms. Spotify won't be there forever, the way it's burning money. Don't put all your eggs in the online baskets. Make your own copies and have physical copies and make backups. The thing about open is you own the data. It's your data. You can do what you like with it. You can share it. You're free to do what you like for the most part. I remember my colleague in the audience, ex-colleague in the audience, moved from where I was working to another library institution, and she wanted to switch from the LMS she was using to Koha. And she could do some of this, but when it came to extracting like the circulation data, no, I've got a long time to go yet, but I hope you indulge me. She was told no, she couldn't have the data. She had to, her data was held hostage, the institution's data was held hostage, so she had to carry on, she had to pay for the data. With Koha, with other open systems, you own the data. Okay, I'm going to move on to AI, and I'm going to start talking really fast these days now, because I've been informed we've got a few minutes left, but I'm going to overrun, and I don't care, because hopefully I've been reasonably interesting. So there's AI, which I think is a terrible thing for the most part. There's lots of varieties of AI. We kind of focus these days on text generation, generative AI, which bears as much resemblance to other forms of AI as disposable vapes, to medical addiction therapy, addiction treatment. Generative AI is a terrible thing, I think. I did this a few days ago. There was a tweet I saw from the HSLG conference, and it was a quote from one of the keynote speakers about the next iteration of ChatGTP would be 100 times smarter than Einstein. Well, it's not. That's just, give me a break. ChatGTP, generative AI chatbots are not smart. The GTP, some people think, stands for glorified predictive text, because that's all they are. All they're doing is using statistical models to guess the next plausible word in a sequence. Generative AI is not about truth, it's about possibility. It makes stuff up. I got a reading list from someone a couple of weeks ago about train-the-trainer resources, and half the articles were made up, half the articles from journals that didn't exist. The Irish Journal of Training, Training Journal of Ireland, Irish Training Journal, and just made up. ChatGPT cannot be used for anything, any serious endeavour. So you saw the Wonka experience, which everybody knows about because it went viral. It's a perfect metaphor for generative AI itself, I think, because it promises so much and delivers so little, and it's becoming pervasive in education, which is really, really bad, I think. You've got the case these days of students using ChatGPT to write essays, and they're using an AI service to make it sound more human. Teachers will then use AI detection services, which themselves are AI generated. and then they'll use ChatGPT derivatives to mark the assignment. So you're taking the human out of the whole educational process, which is really bad. I think you can't do this. I can recognise that it might be useful for folk. It'd be useful for folk. It can do things, but at the same time, you can't use it for creative things. It's no substitute for the human. Also, you're not the product these days, you're the training data. I go back, the ChatGPT giving me philosophers that begin with a P instead of an M. I'll do the thumbs down. They'll be flagged by OpenAI, the makers of ChatGPT, and it's going to be, will be figured out, sorted out the next time. At the same time, OpenAI, these companies scraping stuff from the web, and your data, you've put stuff in the web, you put stuff on Twitter, you've put stuff in websites, you've all created written material, and that's all being used without your consent by these companies to train its data. And it's terrible because, first of all, in order to get it machine readable, you've got to tag it, you've got to classify it. Companies use Kenyan workers who they pay less than $2 an hour, and they get to see all sorts. It's like being a Facebook moderator. You're looking at the content and you're seeing some terrible things. I believe all the workers have just been sacked because they're not needed any longer. AI algorithms are biased, they're gender biased, racially biased, being a cis-right male, I'm okay, yeah, so it's fine for me, but it's biased against non-native English speakers, for example. It uses a hell of a lot of energy, a hell of a lot of water. Every session you have with ChatGPT will use about a half a litre of water for cooling. At the same time, it's the Wild West, particularly in America. It's going to be regulated in the EU, but in America it's still unregulated. People can do what they like, move fast and break things. It seems to be the motto of big tech, and certainly they want to break things without folks saying, hold on a minute, you shouldn't be doing this. So it's bad when they sack all their ethicists. And like disposable vapes, something can be good for you, something can be, and SUVs, something can be good and useful for you, but that doesn't make it good for society. And generative AI isn't good for society. Sam Altman, the creator of CEO of OpenAI, he wants $7 trillion invested in improving the AI infrastructure, new chips, new cloud centres, new computers. He also thinks that AI might kill us all, so he wants $7 trillion to help kill humanity. Go figure. Imagine what you could do with $7 trillion. Maybe you could build a children's hospital here, or you could build a metro to the airport, but there's an incredible number of things you could do instead of funding more AI. And shitification. AI is going to shitify the web, and this is where librarians come in, I think. Google search has deteriorated these days. It's full of SEO, spam, AI-generated piffle. Here's one particularly egregious example. This guy runs an SEO firm, and what he did was he went to the site ExcelJet, which some of you may be aware of, may not. It's a very, very good Excel help site. There's lots of articles on tips and tricks and things you can do with Excel. So he went to that site, he scraped the sitemap, he turned all the URLs into article titles, used AI to create, generative AI to create the articles and stuck them up on his own site. So all these items are dreadful because they refer to Excel functions that don't exist, because it's all made up by AI and it all sounds plausible and nothing else. So this is what the internet is becoming full of these days. And what's happening is that this affects training data. So you remember those botched reconstructions of paintings 10, 15 years ago, Ecce Homo, when done by a Spanish person, and just made a mess of it. Well, this is what training data is going to become. You create chatbots. They're used to generate articles which are then put on the web. They pollute the web, they become a big part of the web, and then they're used in training data, and of course the quality deteriorates each time you go forward. So the web in 2023 onwards it's not functional, it's not usable, particularly with image generators as well. It's going to be difficult to generate the real from the fake, and I think that's where librarians come in. We can a lot of people think that in order to get good results in Google search, you have to put Reddit in the search string, and you're going to laugh at me because I think we should do the same with LibGuides. I've got a love-hate relationship with LibGuides. I hate your LibGuides, I hate your LibGuides, I hate your LibGuides, especially hate your LibGuides. But at the same time, they're really good because they're full of curated content, good quality material, what we write ourselves or what we recommend, websites that we recommend. I had to start our digital library from scratch, so when I was looking for articles, looking for sections to create, I would type like presentation skills in LibGuides or time management in LibGuides, and I get lots of good stuff that way. So I'm coming to the end, honest. I'm really sorry for overrunning. The other thing about AI training data is a lot of the material, the good quality material, is behind a paywall. News items are behind paywalls. A lot of scientific articles are behind paywalls. So the quality of the training data is affected by the fact that it's shit. The shit is free and the good stuff is paywalled. So people are starting to sue AI companies because they're using scraping copyrighted data. It's a novel argument that OpenAI needs to violate copyright to create its product. If I robbed a bank and then said to the judge that I can't become rich without robbing a bank, that's pretty much the same thing, isn't it? So I should be allowed to rob banks. That's not going to wash, and I don't think this is going to wash either. Again, leading on from that, scientific publishers do not want to share their copyrighted material with AI companies, and that's fine. So I think that if we're producing Diamond OA journals, open data can help improve the quality of AI training data. We can hold back the flood of crap, maybe. We can help do that if we want to. The thing is that AI is bleeding into scientific literature. If you do a Google search for something like Google Scholar search for as a language learning model, you'll get results or as of my last update or any phrases you associate with ChatGPT AI. You will see lots of results in Google Scholar. This is a big stoofy about this recently. This is an article from Frontiers, the publishers, who are a bit dodgy, but this is a review article about protein signalling cascades in spermatogenic rat cells, and this is one of the images that they used. This went through peer review, right? So what are publishers doing? What value are publishers adding? If this, here's more, here's Elsevier. It's good that I get gasps because I think everyone knows this, but if you're gasping, that means it's new. That's great. Keep gasping, people. So these are two articles recently in Elsevier. Yeah. So, I mean, maybe it's, if English is not your first language, maybe you can use ChatGPT or something to help improve the quality of language. I've got a mate back in Glasgow who works on a contract basis for a company who are employed to help developing country researchers, sort of Chinese and Indian researchers. They improve the English. He sort of rewrites, proofs the articles, rewrites the English, makes them more sort of readable kind of thing, which is fine. So it might be okay to use ChatGPT to improve the readability of your articles, but you've got to take that shit out before you publish it. I mean, I think we would do that. That's why I think Diamond OA is the way forward, because we'd be better at this. It's a labour of love for us rather than just a way of making money. So what can you do? I don't know. Is there anything you can do? And there's lots of things you can do as librarians. Tell your users about how everything is messed up. You promote open access, open scholarship. Agitate. Tell your superiors. Agitate the LAI to promote open access, open educational resources. Get organised. Create groups. Create things yourself. Create that journal. Create that open resource. Customise existing open resources. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, as I say, and publicise the need for open resources. Publicise the ones that you create. you've got a skill set. You're all librarians. You can do things. You can say shush, and you can stamp books and all that kind of thing. You can teach. You can collection development. There's all sorts of things we can do. We all have personal skill set. I write good. I can proof. Some people think I talk good as well. I'm hopeless at marketing. Other people in the audience are brilliant at marketing. We all have our own strengths, and we can use them in projects that we can work with our communities. We can lead, and there's all sorts of different ways of leadership. Some people are born leaders. I've been fortunate to work with Marie and Jane, who are fantastic leaders and have helped make me the man I am today, kind of thing. Some folk are natural leaders, but at the same time, they can lead by being experts. We are authorities in the things we do. So we don't necessarily have to be pioneers, but we can help, we can lead through the fact that we're experts in our fields. There's the Open Scholarship Group of the LAI, there's Irish Open Access Publishers, which will be mentioned in detail, I think, coming up. There's Anne and Emily's digital literacy resource, which is brilliant, I think. And so they've created that, so you don't have to go and create your own digital literacy resource, but you probably will because of vanity and ego. Whereas you should be, so the thing, I worked for ETBI, which is a representative body which looks after the interests of 16 ETBs, and there's an incredible amount of work being done in those 16 ETBs, but a lot of the time it's been duplicated. And one of the things my library does is it collects work offered by people in the one ETB, and I disseminate it and I share it with the other. Robert and I share it with the other ETBs. So it's not, we don't need to recreate the wheel. If something's there, customise it, use it. Don't create your own stuff for the sake of it so you can write another article for Elsevier or anything. Share, compromise, customise, use other folks' work. It's good. Yeah, information doesn't want to be free. That's actually a misquote. That's the quote there from Stuart Brand, who was an early internet activist. And it's interesting because free means two different things. It means free, gratis, free beer. Cost is free, but the cost isn't free. There's a lot of hard work involved. It's just that the costs of making stuff accessible, that's fallen a lot because of the internet. So open isn't there. There's no magic button. This is a better quote. I absolutely love this quote. I think it's brilliant. It sums everything up. And it recognises there's a lot of hard work that we have to do in order to make stuff free, either free of charge or give folk the rights to do what they like with it. And I think that's a good quote to carry forward. Remember that one. Sharing information is a good thing because it's valuable and improves humanity. And finally, I will stop.